This is the big story tonight, which has to do with the IMF report on Nigeria. In summary, what does it really say? Let me just bring that for you on screen to tell you that the IMF report actually focused on both the fiscal and the monetary side of things for Nigeria. So their staff mission report of that International Monetary Fund released a few days ago commended the Nigerian government for the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the IMF outlook on the economy gives a reason for concern in the near to medium term. Let's start this two-part conversation with Paul Alaje, senior economist at our SPM Professional. Paul joins me live now from our Abuja studios. Good evening, Paul. It's good to see you. Thank you so much. Let's dive straight into this, very heavy as it were. What do you make of some of the latest economic data? We saw the third quarter GDP report, 4.03 positive, but here comes the IMF country report just a few days after. It doesn't look really as sweet as you can expect. Talk to me.
Well, first of all, the report shared by the National Bureau of Statistics regarding the GDP growth rate. Recall the National Bureau of Statistics has also released inflationary rate, all of which is showing that things seems to be getting better and improved. Also, IMF staff report shows that it's not as rosy as some of the report appears, as the foundation is still very, very weak, and we need a number of decisions or policy to make in order for us to have a brighter economic future. First, recall that National Bureau of Statistics says the growth is over 4%. Unlike what we have in second quarter, which was beyond 5%. As a matter of fact, we can confirm that Nigeria is out of recession and the economy continue to grow above the population growth rate of about 2.6, 2.7% as the case may be. So that on one hand, but IMF is even saying that if you are not careful, this growth may disappear as the projected growth rate remains 2.6% at the end of the year, which is relatively the same or a bit below or above, depending on whose report we want to use, the population growth rate. And on the other hand, while we continue to see inflation growing at a reducing rate, that is what we have now is 15.99%, approximately 16%. IMF is also saying, yes, some of the policies taken by the federal government of Nigeria, particularly the Central Bank of Nigeria, seems to have been yielding positive results. But are these results impactful enough? Has double-digit inflation is what they are projecting that Nigeria will have till the end of the year. So on one hand, we are seeing some results, but they're sufficient enough. It is what many people keep on doubt, because it appears, which IMF also agree with government, that 2021 economic performance and output seems to be far better than what we had during the COVID year of 2020. However, the environment still remains very weak, as exchange rate remains quite very weak as against the Naira, and quite a number of other things that IMF has mentioned in the report that was recently released.
Paul, just quickly,
this month.
If you allow me to cut in there, they talk about the COVID-19, which everyone had blamed for virtually everything that went wrong, well managed as it were, but the imprint on the vulnerable Nigerians still out there. The IMF staff report says the outlook is that of a subdued recovery. You talk about the 2.6%. If you look at other major African economies, we're talking about 5%, for example, and all of that. But we're talking about major reforms in fiscal, FX, trade, and governance that is needed, because the headline fiscal deficit is expected to worsen in the near term, and I'm reading that word for word from the IMF report. It's a headline fiscal deficit to worsen in the near term and remain elevated over the medium term. Speak to that for me for about a minute.
Well, when you look at Nigerian fiscal policy, and quite a number of things we can check, but let's take the budget, 16 trillion naira. Nigeria is expected to borrow significantly to finance that budget. On one hand, part of the money being borrowed will be going into subsidy, particularly talking about PMS, to support consumption of PMS in Nigeria, which is huge challenge on one hand. If you remove it, government is also saying that we may have to give 5,000 naira to about 30 to 40 million Nigerians as to cushion the effect of subsidy. This is also also a way of giving directly to the people. So on one hand, we are seeing that the impact of these spendings may not be tremendous.
5,000 naira for 40 million people. What happens to the remaining 160 million people?
Well, government is here to say something about it. And that does not mean that the 5,000 naira given to 40 million people will truly solve the huge gap that subsidy will cause. Recall that in 2012, government even went as far as buying buses, constructing road. But as that changed, the impact of increase in prices was ubiquitous across sector, because PMS remains the energy that we use in our factory, in our vehicles, and so on and so forth. Definitely, government is here to find a lasting solution to what should be done. But if you look at the upside risk that's mentioned by IMF, Dangote Refinery, through the support of PIA that is coming mainstream from this year, and as the implementation continues, IMF is already very hopeful that government will take right administrative decision. And as this refinery come mainstream, it means Nigeria can now have significant local output, which of course can make demand supply.
Yes, the Dangote Refinery will be the Dangote Refinery will be a very major good news, but that will not put food on every Nigerian table. So let's just get that straight here, because the outlook in the near to medium term, according to the IMF, is that the economy could, if we're not careful, could dip into a recession or into a downturn. Again, the refinery is not going to resolve that problem for people, will it?
Well, it may even go into recession faster if we remove subsidy without doing the needful. The 5,000 naira approach is certainly not the solution that can save Nigeria economy from the current or possible economic quagmire. Recall that the base year for the 5% GDP growth and the 4% GDP growth were both negative, -6%, -3%. So if we are celebrating or we are joyful because of this positive growth rate, I think we may not be making a right decision. IMF report, particularly IMF staff report, is what Nigeria authority need to study very carefully and take decision that we think will not hurt our economy so much.
Well, so I'm asking, do you think the reforms that the IMF is talking about, the fiscal reform, exchange rate, trade and governance that IMF says are needed to alter the long-running lackluster growth path? That's, I'm using the exact phrase used by the IMF, says we have the long-running lackluster growth path of the Nigerian economy. Do you think we can get these reforms done in the run-up to the 2023 general elections? Here we are almost in December.
I certainly believe that Nigeria should take major reform and decide to introduce reforms in fiscal, monetary, and trade sector. So, however, it will be very difficult for Nigeria to do this because we have not created foundation for all of these reforms to happen. There is no foundation for them. And that is why politicians would rather go for votes than for economic development.
Okay.
And just watch it. We have seen it over the years.
We'll be right back. That's the issue. That's the right issue. The economy is overheating on many fronts. So what do we do moving forward as we go into election 2023 and the electioneering period, which is 2022? There will be more after the break. Stand by, everyone. The IMF latest staff report on Nigeria says that given the large number of projected new entrants in the labor force and stagnant living conditions, the country's economic growth needs to increase jobs and improve worker welfare. The report adds that with agriculture accounting for almost half of the current employment, any job-rich growth will need to rely considerably on agriculture sector, at least in the near term. Welcome back, my guest, Paul Alaje, in our Abuja studios. Paul, here is the IMF staff report going straight for agriculture and says if we want to get any growth trajectory for job creation, we need to focus on agriculture.
Yeah, I agree completely. Agriculture remains the major driver even of our GDP. It also remains major employer of labor in Nigeria. So for us to have the kind of sustainable growth we are looking for, we are growing, but the environment of the growth is still very weak. we need to pay attention not just to crop production, but also into processing and converting agriculture as we have it today in Nigeria into business, because we have all the supportive indicators. First, population is there for consumption. We have arable land. We only need to see how to convert what is produced on farms to the market, and this will come through a viable manufacturing sector. Recall that IMF has also mentioned that in spite of this growth, exchange rate remains weak, and more importantly, manufacturing sector remains very weak. This is what I think government should pay attention to, so that we can convert some of the outputs that we have into finished product, and Nigeria can consume or also promote export, so that we can have improved foreign reserve.
Well, so here we are right now. This report simply says the country is overheating, where lack of jobs, consumer spending, rising inflation, fueling criminal activities. So any quick wins or actions that you think the government can implement between now and that period when electioneering becomes fever pitch?
Well, what I think is government need to quickly do more in terms of supporting private sector and creating more environment for private sector to thrive, so that we can have more and more people get to job. Also, government, we need to come up with agricultural program that can mop up youths that are currently out of job. If you watch now, National Bureau of Statistics report shows that youth unemployment is even higher than the unemployment level that we have in the country. So unemployment level is about 33%. Youth unemployment is over 40%, which is huge concern. And the population is youthful, but you have more and more youth out of job. So whatever can get people to job, and the area I think government should focus on is ICT, payment system, quite a number of other things that IMF even provided solution to. I mean, I've been given a solution in the report, and I think authorities should pick that document and turn it to solve the problem through sectorial analysis and see what is it that we can do. Are there quick fixes? I really don't believe in quick fixes, but I believe there are few things here and there that we can adjust, particularly now that government has said is going to go ahead with the implementation of National Economic Development Plan, which of course is taking over from Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. So for me, I think we need to get all the states of the federation to economic center. Government is proposing to give about 18 billion to each state to perhaps maybe some of the challenges they have in terms of debt repayment or salaries and so on and so forth. Recall that states already had this kind of money before. But how will these monies help create jobs? 18 billion naira is a lot of money for states. So if we say per state, you need to guarantee a minimum of 10,000 jobs. If you multiply that by 37, that is 36 states, 36 subnational and the FCT. And the federal government is coming up with a robust plan that can guarantee 200,000 jobs. I'm talking of public sector driven approach. Now, private sector, we also have access to create more and more jobs. And this is how we can mop up about 5 million job deficit we have year in, year out, you know, as new set of people that are becoming unemployed. And those we continue to push into extreme poverty. For me, okay, I think it has to be a combination of approaches, private sector and public sector. And this is where government needs to put money. Yes, power supply needs to be a bit better, but that cannot be done overnight. But some of the things that can be done overnight are those things that government, particularly at the state and local government level, needs to look at.
But here we go with that report. Paul, with time, we need to move on quickly. With the IMF spoke about the central bank relief measures of 2020 is now being asked to be monitored to prevent what the IMF called financial system risks, to quote it. What do you make of that in terms of that? The central bank said there will be no extension to its interventions because is the system okay? Are we good to go moving forward? And this support needs to start to be withdrawn in the manner of speaking.
Well, the kind of support central bank has given has turned central bank, rather than to just the apex bank, to an interventionist bank. We need to see the activity, economic activity of some of the financial institutions we have. And more importantly, even the state government that have also become the big borrower, if you like. So I also think we need to monitor. I completely agree with IMF. We need to monitor the spendings and the intervention that central bank has embarked upon. Recall that recently central bank is saying even those that have have borrowed in the name of Anchor Borrowers Program, they need to start to refund the money. Unfortunately, many of these farmers have seen this money as part of their share of the national cake. So how do we get new monies to give us new loans? This is a real concern, perhaps, and that is what IMF, one of the things IMF is talking about.
Okay, so in a manner of speaking, to sum it up, the banking sector is said to remain very resilient, but in your opinion, the government is asked to build a whole lot more to instill public trust. Just to talk about what you said earlier about implementing difficult but needed reforms in the period down to election year. How much of this do you think we can do? Yes, the banking, the financial system is okay, but on the fiscal side, how much more do you think the market or the economy can bite before the elections? Everybody gets on the street on electioneering and all of that.
Well, I strongly believe that this economy will struggle to election. The growth rate on the average annually will be below 3% on an annual basis. And that's what we are going to have, because some of the time that we had the opportunity to put huge investment in the economy, unfortunately, we have not managed our resources well. As the election approaches, by next year, attention of government will change. And this is not just about federal government across board. We change from development, economic development, to politicking and going back to win election in offices. Some of these spendings is not going to be as much as you expect on infrastructure, but what can sustain people just for election period? And you and I know that this is promoting consumption as against investment. Again, how will we adopt some of the recommendations made by IMF in this regard when we are not spending anymore on investment but on consumption? Of course, on pre-election year, it will even have positive, to be truthful, it's going to contribute to GDP because it's still an exchange going on in the economy. But how long will the growth last, which is the question IMF is asking, and perhaps have tagged a weak growth environment. And I hope the authority will do the needful.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul Alaje. Today, the Central Bank of Nigeria talk about a new form of entrepreneurship that's being offered students, which is a new scheme for university students. Of course, it's allowing students to also get a whole lot into entrepreneurship in the higher institutions. But we'll hear more about that today and days ahead. Thank you so much, Paul Alaje from SPM Professionals. We appreciate your insight here.